So, Danny, let's talk about it. I mean, you've had a number of clients, I'm sure, that are sometimes not residents of the United States.
Oh, yes.
In a case of, for example, going to another country to try and reach a client, in your specific case, the senator says he was not given access to it. What are the average normal problems in, for example, you, the lawyer, not a senator, you, a lawyer, going to speak to your client who may be in a jail in El Salvador or anywhere else?
Every criminal defense lawyer has to deal on some level with immigration because federal law sometimes requires or makes removable someone who's been convicted of a crime. But there are other subsections to that law that most criminal defense lawyers and most lawyers in general never look at. For example, the power of the Secretary of State to remove people based on their problems they create for foreign policy. You can technically be removed if you're on public assistance. This is something the Trump administration has excelled at, which is finding these dusty parts of the law that people don't normally use and using them now in a way that we can't really answer what the contours of that law are because it's never really been tested. So in terms of visiting your client, I've had this issue before, even when the federal marshals are transporting your client across this country, not internationally, and they effectively vanish. It is so difficult to reach your client if the federal government is not that interested in making him or her available to his lawyers. Yes, they have a constitutional right to access to their lawyers, but what that access is not the way you and I think of access, where I can pick up my phone and text you and you respond instantaneously. That is not part of the constitutional protections that detainees or criminal defendants actually have.
And so, Paula, there's also, of course, the bigger aspect of this, and it's not about one specific case, one specific person all the time, although that is an important one to focus on. But as far as a bigger picture, the fact that he is returned to El Salvador, and El Salvador under Nayib Bukele is a far different country than it was even 20 years ago. Many would say for good, but there are also other issues there.
Right, and I think that's the point. We're dealing with two people that want to be strongmen. And so everything that the United States is doing right now is feeding into Nayib Bukele's image of a strong man. No, there's nothing more powerful than him being able to retain Gilmar Abrego Garcia.
Who's Salvadoran.
Who's Salvadorian, and not let him go, right? So yes, let's remember who we're dealing with. He's the self-described world's coolest dictator. Nayib Bukele is someone that defied his own constitution so that he could run again. He's someone that has incarcerated over 1% of the population. And in doing that, there have been dozens and dozens of children. You talk to some human rights lawyers in the country, and they will tell you that under Nayib Bukele, at least 260 people have died. And so there's this question as to what does he not want us to see? No, what is the threat of having Gilmar Abrego Garcia talk? And there's a lot of things potentially that they don't want us to see: the torture, the human rights abuses, and what happens inside that dark, dark hole.
And so interesting, because those 200 and something people that may have for certain lost their lives under Nayib Bukele, there are also countless people who have been able to come out of their houses. They've been able to have their small negocio or their pupuseria because in the past, the gangs had such an impact and influence on daily life, not for the rich and famous, but for the average person.
And I think that is the complicated thing here, that Nayib Bukele is one of the most popular leaders in Latin America. He's so popular. And I think what he's telling Donald Trump is he's saying, look, you can kind of be a strong man because people want security so much that they're willing to let go of some of their civil rights. And I think that's what's so interesting and complicated here.
Yeah. And Danny, I mean, the administration released all these other bits of information about Abrego Garcia, including the 2019 filing showing local officials suspecting he was a gang member. He was arrested with two other suspected gang members. And in 2021, his wife sought that domestic violence restraining order against him. Does this have any relevance, that restraining order later she dropped? Is there any relevance to these pieces of information to the broader case?
It is, insofar that it's evidence the government's relying on for their claim that he is a member of MS-13. We're not applying the same beyond a reasonable doubt standard that we would in a criminal case, because this is not a criminal case. And so focusing on things like the hat, the logo, sometimes it's the colors. It is true that sometimes members of gangs do adopt the colors, the specific colors of a professional team, or the logo even. But usually that's accompanied by other evidence. And what troubles me about this is that, yes, someone may have been wearing a Chicago Bulls hat. And the mere fact that they may be nowhere near Chicago doesn't mean anything. There are people who move around all over the country who retain their fanship of a particular team. Normally, you see this kind of evidence accompanied by things like tattoos, specifically prison tattoos. There are gang units that keep track of these kinds of things. These are things that are recorded in databases. You might have other activity that makes up part of the total picture of a potential gang member. But I have to say, it's pretty rare for me to see, especially in the criminal defense context, allegations of gang membership based on what appears to be really unsupported allegations. In this case, it was by confidential informants, and it was only for the purpose of detention. It wasn't for proving his criminal responsibility for any gang violence or gang crimes. And other than that, a Chicago Bulls hat by itself doesn't really meet the standard, at least for me.
Kelly, so what do you think these new details released by the administration tell us about the White House's efforts to take this case to the court of public opinion?
They're really trying to redirect to the issue of concern for American citizens broadly and fear of violence committed by those who are not lawfully in the country. Yesterday, for example, in the White House briefing room and later at an event with the president for Holy Week, Patty Morin, whose daughter was murdered, and that case has nothing to do with Abrego Garcia. There was a conviction of an unlawful immigrant in the country who has now been convicted for that crime and has been put through the process post-conviction into sentencing. Her story, and the White House calls these angel moms, the families of those who have had a loved one killed or other serious violence against them from someone not lawfully here. So putting the attention on the character of Abrego Garcia, putting the attention on other cases like the Morin family, that is a way to sort of support the president's aggressive approach to deportations and immigration, to say that he is fulfilling a promise to get rid of criminals who are not lawfully here and to try to bring about greater security. That can be appealing to voters who supported the president. And so in that way, they are redirecting public attention to things that they think are relevant in this conversation, whereas for a few days we've been talking about the lawful activities, the due process, the other components of this, which are also important, but might hit people in a different way. So they're going for the heart and fear, probably, about concerns about violence and so forth. A lot like you were talking about the atmosphere in El Salvador with the stronger tactics by Bukele.
And Paula, talking about fear, you know, many people in our communities are feeling fear because of what they're seeing, and not just on this case, and not just on who is or who is not an MS-13 or any other gang group, but people who have been here, many for decades, without documents. Many have U.S.-born children living in mixed immigration status families. There are a lot of fear among those people that have nothing to do with Mara Salvatrucha or Tren de Aragua or anybody else.
What's powerful now is that it's not just them, but it's also American citizens. Now, the fear is now also translating within American citizens, because I think, look, for so long, Americans, I think, were able to kind of distance themselves from migrants and the border and immigration. Some of them were able to tap into Donald Trump's fear mongering. They believed it. Now, suddenly, what you're seeing is this reckoning that Gilmar Abrego Garcia could be any one of us. No, it could be us. No, this idea that the more that this administration weakens our democracy, the likelier they are to go after every single one of us. No? This idea that there's no due process simply means that at any point, whether you are undocumented or not, a citizen or not, this administration can look at any one of us and say, this person looks like a criminal. This person looks like a pro-Hamas person. This person looks anti-Christian for being gay. And so I think that, to me, is the moment we're in, where that fear suddenly is now also reaching American citizens, and they're potentially waking up.